Hidden beneath the sands of time lies a script that no one was meant to forget. A forgotten language carved by a civilization that vanished without a trace. Yet its secrets still survive. Who created it? What did they try to protect? And why has history buried their story for thousands of years? Before we uncover this lost mystery, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more forgotten stories from the ancient world. The seal is small enough to disappear inside a closed hand. A square of pale stone worn smooth at the edges, no larger than a few centimeters across. On its face stands a powerful animal with a heavy body, a lowered head, and a single horn projecting forward. Above it runs a row of tiny symbols, a fish-like shape, a jar, a pair of strokes, a branching form that resembles neither letter nor picture with any certainty. The object has survived fire, burial, flood deposits, collapsing walls, and more than 4,000 years of silence. It once belonged to someone who could read it without effort. That person is gone. Their language may be gone. The city around them is dead. Yet the marks remain compact and deliberate, guarding a message that no one living can securely recover. The first major discoveries come from the plains of the Indus River system, where ruined mounds have long risen above fields and villages like natural hills. Local people know that ancient bricks lie inside them. For generations, those bricks are removed and reused in houses, roads, and railway construction. They're well-made, uniform, and plentiful, which makes them valuable long before anyone understands the scale of the civilization that produced them. When archaeologists begin examining the mounds more carefully in the 19th and early 20th centuries, they initially expect to find another provincial settlement, perhaps connected to a better-known period of South Asian history. Instead, they encounter something far older and far larger. At Harappa, and then at Mohenjo-Daro, hundreds of kilometers away, walls emerge from beneath the soil in disciplined lines. Streets cross at measured angles. Houses cluster around courtyards. Wells descend into the earth. Covered drains run beside lanes and beneath buildings. The bricks follow standardized proportions across immense distances. Workshops, storage areas, bathing platforms, and carefully constructed neighborhoods suggest urban planning on a scale that no one had expected in Bronze Age South Asia. By the 1920s, it becomes clear that these are not isolated ruins. They belong to a civilization that flourished at roughly the same time as ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, yet had remained largely absent from modern historical memory. Among the most intriguing finds are the seals. Some are carved from steatite, a soft stone that can be shaped precisely and then hardened by firing. Many bear animals, bulls, elephants, rhinoceroses, buffalo, tigers, composite creatures, and the famous so-called unicorn, which appears more often than any real species. Above these images sit short rows of signs. The inscriptions are usually brief sometimes, only 3 or 4 characters, occasionally longer, rarely extending beyond a few dozen. They are not random scratches. The symbols are repeated across sites separated by hundreds of kilometers. Their forms are controlled. Their order appears patterned. Certain signs favor the beginning of inscriptions, while others appear more often at the end. Whoever made them followed rules. That realization changes the nature of the discovery. The ruined cities are no longer only architectural remains. They belong to a society that recorded information, or at least encoded meaning in a formal visual system. Somewhere inside those tiny inscriptions may be personal names, official titles, occupations, places, gods, institutions, offerings, taxes, shipments, or declarations of authority. But none of those possibilities can be confirmed. The signs can be seen, their sequence can be copied, their frequency can be measured, their meaning remains sealed. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. The mystery becomes sharper because the civilization itself seems almost designed to deny later historians the usual answers. Egypt leaves royal names carved across temple walls and tombs. Mesopotamia preserves thousands of clay tablets, many of them long enough to compare, translate, and place in context. Kings announce victories. Officials record grain. Merchants list debts. Priests copy hymns. The Indus world leaves no surviving stone monuments covered in text, no long legal codes, no known chronicles, and no archive of tablets baked hard in a palace fire. Its writing appears mostly on seals, seal impressions, small tablets, pottery fragments, copper objects, tools, and ornaments. The surviving texts are so short that even identifying the underlying language becomes extraordinarily difficult. The script itself contains several hundred distinct signs depending on how scholars separate basic symbols from variants. Some are simple strokes or geometric forms. Others resemble fish plants, vessels, grids, human figures, or tools. Their appearance tempts the eye into guessing. A fish must mean fish. A jar must mean jar. A human form must represent a person. But ancient scripts rarely surrender so easily. A sign may represent a whole word, a sound, a syllable, a grammatical marker, a number, or several of these depending on context. A recognizable picture may have acquired an abstract meaning centuries before the surviving inscription was carved. The image may be a clue or it may be a trap. Even the direction of reading had to be reconstructed. Many seal inscriptions appear to run from right to left, inferred partly from the way signs are crowded or compressed near one edge, and from how impressions reverse the original carving. Some longer examples may change direction, though the evidence remains incomplete. The signs are carefully arranged, but there are no spaces clearly separating words. There is no punctuation that scholars can identify with confidence. Repeated sequences suggest formulas, titles, or fixed categories, yet no single explanation fully accounts for the system. Then there is the object beneath the inscription. The animal images are not decorative in any simple sense. The so-called unicorn often stands before a strange object, sometimes described as a ritual stand manger filter or offering device. Scholars still debate what either image represents. The creature may be mythical, stylized, symbolic, or a conventional profile of a real animal, with one horn hidden behind the other. Its dominance suggests importance perhaps linked to a clan office institution, merchant group, or religious idea. But without readable text, every interpretation remains provisional. The most haunting fact is that the script was once ordinary. It was not created to puzzle the future. It belonged to transactions, identities, routines, and beliefs that made immediate sense to the people handling these objects. A seal might have been pressed into wet clay to mark a bundle. Secure a container, authorize a shipment, or identify its owner. A tablet might have been carried, exchanged, counted, or deposited during a ritual. The people using them did not live inside a mystery. They lived inside a functioning world. What survives in the record suggests a civilization connected by shared standards, repeated symbols, long-distance exchange, and remarkably stable forms. Yet the names of its cities are unknown. Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro are modern names, not the words their inhabitants used. No ruler can be securely identified. No prayer can be read. No law, insult, dedication, or personal memory has reached us in a voice we can understand. The script remains like a locked door standing in the ruins, and behind it waits not merely a language but an entire civilization's account of itself. The cities that produced those seals did not begin as sudden miracles in the dust. They grew out of older villages, farming communities, river crossings, craft traditions, and trade routes that had been developing for centuries across the greater Indus region. By the time Harappa and Mohenjo-daro reached their mature form, the civilization stretched across an enormous area from the mountains and dry uplands of the northwest to the plains of Punjab and Sindh and eastward toward regions that today lie in India. Its settlements were not identical, but they shared enough habits to reveal a cultural system of remarkable reach. Bricks were made in familiar proportions. Weights followed common standards. Pottery styles travelled across long distances. Seals carried the same script. Urban life seems coordinated without looking centralised in the way historians usually expect. That absence is one of the strangest features of the Indus world. In Egypt, rulers make themselves unavoidable. Their names fill monuments, their bodies occupy elaborate tombs, and their authority is expressed in stone on a scale intended to survive. Mesopotamian kings build palaces, commission inscriptions, and describe their victories in language that leaves little doubt about who claims power. The Indus cities offer no comparable royal spectacle. Archaeologists have found large buildings, fortified sectors, elevated platforms, and carefully planned public works, but no structure can be confidently identified as a palace. No tomb has emerged as the unmistakable burial place of a king. No statue towers over the ruins proclaiming a ruler's divine status. No battlefield inscription praises conquest. If powerful individuals governed these cities, they did not advertise themselves in the familiar vocabulary of ancient monarchy. This does not mean the Indus civilization was equal leaderless or peaceful by nature. Such conclusions move beyond the evidence. Wealth differences existed. Some houses were larger than others. Certain neighborhoods had better access to wells, drains, and working spaces. Valuable materials such as gold, carnelian, lapis lazuli, shell, and imported stone were not distributed evenly. Specialized crafts required control over labor, knowledge, and exchange. Large construction projects demanded planning. Someone decided where streets would run, how drains would connect, and which brick standards builders would follow. Authority clearly existed. The uncertainty lies in its form. It may have been distributed among councils, merchant families, land-holding groups, ritual specialists, administrators, or several overlapping institutions. Power may have operated through control of trade, watercraft production, religious practice, or access to storage. A city does not need a king carved 30 meters high to possess hierarchy. It only needs systems that make people obey rules, contribute labor, accept measurements, and recognize certain symbols as legitimate. In the Indus world, those systems may have been more visible in everyday order than in monumental propaganda. Mohenjo-daro makes this especially clear. Its streets appear planned, though not every lane belongs to a single perfect grid. Houses are often built inward with entrances opening from side streets, rather than exposing domestic life to the main roads. Many contain bathing areas with sloped floors that direct wastewater into drains. Wells are unusually common, some private and some serving neighborhoods. Brick channels carry waste away from buildings, and access points allow sections to be cleaned. The system is not modern sanitation, and it should not be romanticized as flawless, but its scale reveals sustained civic coordination. Drains only work when households, builders, and maintenance workers follow shared expectations. The famous Great Bath stands within a raised complex at Mohenjo-daro. It's a carefully sealed brick tank reached by stairways surrounded by rooms and passages. Its exact purpose remains unknown. It may have supported ritual bathing, collective ceremony, purification, elite gatherings, or another activity that left no readable explanation. What matters is the investment required to build it. Layers of brick, gypsum, mortar, and waterproofing were used to contain water. The structure suggests that organized public activity mattered deeply, even if the civilization refused to label that activity for later archaeologists. Harappa shows similar complexity. Excavations reveal large platforms, workshops, drained streets, and areas once interpreted as granaries, though some older identifications are now debated. This is a recurring problem in Indus archaeology. Buildings are often named by comparison with better-known civilizations: citadel, granary, college, palace, temple. Yet those labels can create false certainty. A raised district is not automatically a fortress. A large hall is not necessarily an administrative chamber. Rows of brick foundations may have supported storage craft work markets or functions that do not fit familiar categories. The evidence remains incomplete because the script cannot confirm what these places were called or how they were used. Standardization offers one of the clearest signs of shared authority. Indus bricks often follow a ratio of roughly 1 to 2 to 4 in thickness, width, and length. This proportion appears across many settlements and through long spans of time. Cubical stone weights also follow carefully controlled systems, allowing goods to be measured with consistency. Such standards would have supported trade taxation, rationing craft production, or regulated exchange. They also suggest that communities separated by great distances recognize common rules. Whether those rules were imposed by a central state or maintained through networks of local authorities remains uncertain. The script belongs inside this world of disciplined measurement. A seal may not simply identify a person. It may express a position within a larger system, linking an individual to a workshop, household, institution, commodity, or place. The repeated animals could function like emblems. The sign sequences could encode names and titles. Seals might have helped officials track goods or merchants protect ownership. Yet their contexts are varied, and no single theory explains every example. Some are found in houses, others in working areas, drained streets, or disturbed layers. Many were never recovered with clear impressions, making their exact use difficult to reconstruct. Lesser-known finds complicate the picture further. At some sites, archaeologists have uncovered small tablets with writing on multiple faces, too compact to serve like monumental records and perhaps intended for controlled circulation. Other inscriptions appear scratched onto pottery before or after firing. Marks on tools and ornaments suggest that symbols entered craft production as well as trade. The script was not confined to a royal office because no such office has been found. It moved through the city. This may be why the civilization feels both organized and anonymous. Its greatest statements are not statues of rulers but repeating systems, aligned streets, measured bricks, regulated weights, engineered wells, standardized seals. Power appears embedded in procedures. Identity may have been expressed through symbols rather than portraits. The dead civilization does not present a single face. It presents a pattern, and patterns are difficult to interrogate. They reveal that people followed rules but not who wrote them. They show that cities were coordinated but not whether authority was hereditary, elected, sacred, commercial, or enforced through institutions that have no precise modern equivalent. The Indus world was not without rulers. It was without rulers who have agreed to introduce themselves. Long before the great avenues of Mohenjo-Daro carried carts between brick houses, people across the Indus borderlands were already marking clay painting pottery, carving stone and repeating symbols whose meanings now lie just beyond reach. The mature script does not emerge from nothing. Its roots appear to stretch backward into the centuries when villages expanded, trade networks thickened, and local traditions began to converge. Yet the path from simple mark to formal writing is not straight, and every attempt to trace it must pass through a landscape where signs may be decorative, practical, religious, or linguistic, without clearly announcing which role they serve. At early farming settlements such as Mehrgarh, far to the west of the later urban centres, Communities cultivated crops, raised animals, produced ornaments, and exchanged materials over considerable distances. These settlements begin thousands of years before the height of the Indus civilization. Their inhabitants leave no confirmed written texts, but they establish many of the economic and craft foundations from which later complexity grows. Potters learn to control form and firing. Beadmakers work with shell, stone, and bone. Traders move goods between plains, highlands, and coastal regions. As communities become larger and more connected, the need to distinguish ownership, origin, quantity, or status likely increases. Small painted motifs appear on ceramics lines, grids, plants, animals intersecting shapes and geometric arrangements. Some patterns may identify workshops or communities. Others may carry symbolic or ritual meaning. A mark repeated on several vessels can look like the beginning of a written sign, but resemblance alone proves very little. Human beings use simple shapes everywhere. Crosses, circles, branches, ladders, and fish-like forms can emerge independently because they are easy to draw and visually memorable. Scholars still debate which early marks belong to the ancestry of the Indus script and which are merely part of a broader decorative language. By the 4th millennium, BCE regional cultures across the Indus zone become increasingly distinct yet interconnected. Settlements grow, craft specialization intensifies, pottery traditions develop recognizable styles, seals and seal-like objects begin to appear in forms that anticipate later practices. Some bear geometric designs rather than inscriptions. Their use may have involved stamping clay marking containers, securing goods, or signaling identity. The important shift is not the presence of writing in a fully developed sense, but the growing habit of placing standardized symbols onto objects that move through social and economic networks. This is how writing often begins, not with poetry or royal history, but with pressure. More goods travel farther. More people participate in exchange. More strangers need to trust marks associated with individuals, households, or institutions. Memory alone becomes less reliable as settlements enlarge and transactions multiply. A symbol impressed into clay can travel where its owner cannot. It can certify a bundle, close a jar, identify a shipment, or represent authority. Whether the earliest Indus-related marks already encoded speech remains uncertain, but the social conditions that make formal notation useful are clearly taking shape. At sites associated with the early Harappan period, archaeologists find signs that resemble later Indus characters, though often in less standardized forms. Some are scratched onto pottery, others appear painted before firing. A vessel might carry a single sign near its rim or base, perhaps indicating a potter owner, quantity, destination, or ritual category. The exact meaning is unknowable. A single mark cannot reveal grammar. It may not even represent language. Yet when related forms recur across different settlements, they suggest that people are drawing from a shared repertoire rather than inventing each mark anew. The transition toward urban civilization unfolds gradually between roughly 3200 and 2600 BCE. Settlements such as Harappa expand and reorganize. Fortified or walled sectors appear at several sites. Craft production becomes more specialized. Long-distance exchange links the Indus region to Afghanistan, Iran, Central Asia, the Arabian coast, and eventually Mesopotamia. Standardized weights and vessel forms become more common. The visual world also begins to tighten. Signs that once varied by region are increasingly repeated in controlled combinations. By the beginning of the mature Harappan phase, the script is already developed enough to appear across a vast territory. That sudden maturity creates a problem. The earliest confirmed inscriptions are not long enough, numerous enough, or securely dated enough to show every stage of development. There is no surviving sequence in which crude pictures slowly transform into conventional signs across hundreds of examples. Instead, archaeology provides fragments, an isolated symbol here, a seal impression. They're a pottery mark that may or may not belong to the same system. The evidence remains incomplete, and the missing stages invite competing reconstructions. One possibility is that the script developed locally through the gradual formalization of older marks. Under this view, symbols used for ownership, ritual, or craft identity became increasingly standardized as urban institutions expanded. Another possibility is that contact with literate societies to the west encouraged Indus communities to create their own system. Mesopotamian writing was already well established, and trade routes carried not only goods, but ideas. Yet the Indus signs do not look like borrowed cuneiform, and there is no evidence that they simply copied a foreign script. Influence may have provided the concept of writing without supplying its actual forms. The distinction matters because invention is rarely a single moment. No unknown genius needs to have sat down and designed hundreds of signs at once. A writing system can emerge from generations of small adjustments. A mark used by one group becomes recognized by another. A picture loses detail and becomes easier to carve. A symbol begins to represent not the object it depicts, but the sound of its name. Several marks are combined to express a person, place, title, or commodity. Rules become habitual. Habit becomes convention. Convention becomes something that can be taught. The Indus script may preserve traces of this process in its uneven sign frequencies. A small group of signs appears often while many others are rare. Some symbols have simple variants with additional strokes suggesting numerical, grammatical, or classificatory modification. Certain signs occur in stable positions, hinting that scribes understood a structured order. These features belong to the mature system, but they imply a period of experimentation before standardization took hold. There is also a surprising level of continuity between early regional traditions and later urban imagery. Horned animals, pipal leaves, intersecting circles, and geometric motifs appear in changing forms across long periods. This does not mean their meanings remained fixed. Symbols survive by changing. A motif painted on a village pot may later be absorbed into an elite emblem or ritual system. The same shape can carry different meanings in different contexts, while still preserving a sense of familiarity. By the time the great cities rise, the people of the Indus world inherit not only agricultural knowledge and trade routes, but a visual memory accumulated over generations. Their script becomes one of the clearest expressions of that inheritance. It belongs to the metropolis, yet its deepest foundations were laid in villages where potters, traders, farmers, and craftspeople began leaving deliberate marks on the objects around them. The first steps toward the locked language were taken before anyone could have imagined the cities it would one day guard. Once the Indus cities reach their mature form, order becomes their most visible language. It appears in brick walls laid to familiar proportions, in streets that carry movement through dense neighborhoods, in wells sunk deep into shifting ground, and in drains designed to move wastewater away from homes. It appears in workshops where shell, copper, stone, and clay are transformed into standardized objects. It appears in cubicle weights so carefully made that merchants in distant settlements could measure goods according to the same system. The civilization's script remains unread, but its built environment speaks constantly of rules. This order is easy to admire and equally easy to misunderstand. The cities were not perfect grids produced from a single master plan. Mohenjo-daro grew through rebuilding, repair, and adaptation. Streets narrowed or shifted. Houses were altered as families changed. Drains clogged, walls collapsed, and new floors were laid over older ones. Yet beneath these adjustments lies a strong commitment to shared methods. builders repeatedly chose similar brick dimensions. Houses often followed common principles of privacy, drainage, and access to water. Public and domestic construction belong to the same technological tradition. Such consistency across generations suggests more than habit. It suggests institutions capable of preserving standards. The most widespread standard is the brick itself. In many mature Harappan settlements, baked and mud bricks follow a proportional ratio close to 1 to 2 to 4. This makes them easy to combine in walls, corners, drains, platforms, and wells. Standard dimensions reduce mistakes and allow builders to work quickly with familiar units. They also imply agreement over molds, measurements, and acceptable production. A brick maker in one city could create a product recognizable hundreds of kilometers away. That does not prove the existence of a single imperial authority, but it reveals a shared system strong enough to cross regional boundaries. The same pattern appears in weights. Indus weights were often made from dense stone and shaped into small cubes. Many belong to a carefully graduated series, allowing quantities to be calculated with surprising precision. Merchants, administrators, or craft specialists could use them to measure raw materials and finished goods. Beads, metals, grain oils, textiles, pigments, and other commodities may all have passed through regulated transactions. The exact units remain debated, but the consistency is difficult to dismiss. Measurement was not improvised at each marketplace. It was part of the civilization's structure. Writing may have helped that structure function. A seal pressed into clay could connect goods with a person, workshop, household, or institution. A short inscription might record a name or title, while the animal image signaled a broader affiliation. Small tablets could have served as tokens, permits, receipts, or ritual objects. Pottery marks might distinguish contents, makers, or destinations. No single explanation fully accounts for every artifact, but the distribution of inscriptions suggests that information moved alongside material goods. At the city of Dolavera, on an island-like landscape in the salt flats of Kutch urban order, takes a distinctive form. Massive stone architecture, reservoirs, gateways, and carefully divided sectors reveal a city adapted to an environment where water management was essential. Channels directed seasonal runoff into storage basins. Walls shaped movement through the settlement. One of the most remarkable discoveries is a set of large symbols once mounted near a gateway. The signs were far larger than those carved on ordinary seals, perhaps intended to be seen from a distance. Their wooden backing decayed, but the white mineral pieces that formed the symbols survived. This find is important because it shows that the script was not limited to tiny private objects. It could also be displayed publicly. The Dolavira signboard may have named the city a district, a ruler, an institution, or a place of importance. Scholars still debate its meaning, and without a readable parallel it remains impossible to choose confidently among these possibilities. Yet its scale changes the atmosphere of the script. Some signs were not merely handled by merchants or officials. They stood above an entrance, addressing people who approached. The city of Lothal offers another version of organized life. Located near routes connecting inland settlements with the Arabian Sea, it became associated with tradecraft production and bead making. A large brick basin at the site has often been described as a dockyard, though alternative interpretations have been proposed. Whether it served ships, water storage, or several purposes over time, the structure reflects substantial control of construction and water. Workshops nearby produced carnelian beads through processes that required heating, drilling, polishing, and precise knowledge of stone. Carnelian beads were not casual ornaments. Some required weeks of skilled labor. Long barrel-shaped examples were drilled with specialized tools, and their polished surfaces traveled far beyond the Indus region. Mesopotamian elites valued stones believed to come from lands to the east. The production of such goods required access to raw materials, trained craftspeople, fuel tools, and distribution networks. Every finished bead carried within it a chain of organized decisions. Other industries reveal similar discipline. Shell workers transformed marine shells into bangles, inlays, ladles, and decorative pieces, sometimes far from the coast. Coppersmiths cast tools, vessels, and ornaments. Potters produced forms that recur across distant settlements, while also preserving regional differences. Faience makers created bright glazed objects from carefully controlled mixtures of ground minerals. The civilization's famous etched carnelian beads required white designs to be chemically fixed onto red stone, a technique whose details were understood through practice rather than written manuals that survive. The transmission of this knowledge is itself a form of invisible order. Apprentices had to learn temperatures, proportions, tool angles, and sequences of work. Builders had to understand drainage slopes and wall bonds, while diggers had to construct circular shafts that resisted pressure. Surveyors or experienced planners had to align streets and platforms. Farmers coordinated with seasonal rivers whose behavior could be generous one year and destructive the next. Boatmen moved goods through channels, estuaries, and coastal waters. The civilization depended on trained memory. Perhaps the script recorded some of that complexity, but its surviving form gives little indication of technical explanation. No long architectural plan, craft manual, or administrative register has been recovered. This may reflect the materials used for longer texts. Palm leaves, bark, cloth wood, or other perishable surfaces could have vanished in the heat and soil. It is possible that seals preserve only the most durable edge of a much broader literate culture. It is also possible that writing was restricted to short formal expressions, and that most knowledge remained oral. What survives in the record suggests a society in which coordination mattered more than spectacle. The largest achievements are systems rather than monuments to individuals. Water is brought close to homes. Waste is directed away. Bricks fit one another. Goods can be weighed. Workshops produce objects for distant markets. Symbols repeat according to rules. These patterns do not reveal a utopia. They reveal administration, discipline, labor, and probably unequal access to resources. Order always has a human cost, even when the names of those who imposed it are missing. The script may be the closest surviving trace of those unnamed authorities. Its short sequences could contain the identities of officials who regulated exchange families, who controlled workshops, priests who supervised ritual spaces, or merchants whose seals carried trust across borders. Until the signs are read, the civilization's governing ideas remain hidden inside the systems they created. Its streets show that people knew where to walk. Its drains show where water had to go. Its weights show how value was measured. Only the script might tell us who decided. The script does not survive in grand libraries. It survives in hands. It appears on objects small enough to carry through a market press, into clay tie to a bundle place inside a room, or lose beside a drain. This is one reason the Indus inscriptions feel so intimate despite being unreadable. They belong less to distant monuments than to the ordinary movement of goods and people. A carved seal may once have hung from a cord around someone's neck or waist. A marked pot may have stood in a kitchen, storeroom, workshop, or courtyard. A tiny tablet may have passed from one person to another during an exchange whose terms vanished thousands of years ago. The most familiar objects are square stamp seals usually carved from steatite. Their manufacture required several stages. A craftsperson first shaped the soft stone, cut the animal image and signs, in reverse drilled or carved a raised boss on the back, and then treated the surface with heat and an alkaline substance that produced a pale, hardened finish. The lines are often astonishingly precise. Hooves, horns, muscles, facial features, and ceremonial objects can be rendered within a space scarcely wider than a thumb. The inscriptions above them are equally controlled. This was skilled work, not casual scratching. The raised boss on the back contains a hole allowing the seal to be suspended or secured. Wear around these openings suggests that at least some seals were carried regularly. Their owners may have worn them as practical tools, visible symbols of identity, or both. A seal could act as a portable claim to authority. When pressed into wet clay, it produced a reversed image that could be attached to a package vessel, doorway, or container. Breaking the clay would reveal interference. The same principle appears in many ancient societies where sealings protected goods and showed who had authorized or inspected them. Yet surprisingly few Indus seal impressions survive compared with the number of seals recovered. This may be partly due to preservation. Unfired clay sealings are fragile and easily destroyed by water rebuilding and soil pressure. Many may have been discarded after a transaction and dissolved back into the ground. Others may remain unidentified among small clay fragments. It is also possible that seals had functions beyond securing containers. They may have been displayed, exchanged, used in ceremonies, or treated as signs of status. Some sealings that do survive preserve impressions of cords, cloth, baskets, mats, or other materials on their reverse surfaces. These traces provide brief contact with vanished objects that archaeology rarely preserves. A clay lump may retain the texture of woven fabric or the twist of a rope that disappeared millennia ago. The seal marks one side. The ghost of the package remains on the other. Together they suggest a world of bundled goods, wrapped commodities, and controlled movement through warehouses, workshops, or checkpoints. The inscriptions themselves are often arranged above an animal, but not always. Some seals contain only signs. Others use unusual layouts, including symbols placed beside or beneath an image. Rectangular seals occur alongside square ones, and certain examples contain writing without the familiar animal composition. The variation may reflect different functions, regions, periods, or ranks. A standard seal format could signal one kind of identity, while a less common shape served another. The evidence remains incomplete because the same object type may have carried several meanings depending on context. Small inscribed tablets deepen the uncertainty. Some are made of molded terracotta rather than carved stone. They may contain signs, human figures, animals, or scenes on several faces. Unlike stamp seals, many were not designed to create impressions. Their images and inscriptions were meant to be viewed directly. They could have served as tokens, accounting devices, teaching pieces, ritual offerings, passes, or temporary records. Some appear in groups suggesting standardized production. Others are unique. Their small size makes them easy to transport, but their purpose remains elusive. At Harappa, miniature tablets have been found with repeated combinations of signs and images. Certain motifs recur often enough to suggest established formulas. One face may show an animal, another a human figure, and another a short inscription. These objects may connect economic and ritual activity in ways modern categories separate too sharply. A transaction could also be sacred. A mark of ownership could invoke protection. An institutional emblem could be understood through myth. The Indus people did not necessarily divide commerce, religion, administration, and identity as later scholars do. Pottery provides another setting for signs. Marks appear before firing when the clay was still soft, and after firing when a sharp tool scratched the hardened surface. A mark made before firing may belong to the potter workshop or production process. One added afterward may indicate an owner, merchant, contents destination, or later reuse. Some vessels carry a single sign, others contain several. Because pottery was common and widely distributed, these marks may reveal that knowledge of certain symbols extended beyond a narrow group of elite seal carvers. Not every pottery mark belongs to the full script. Simple strokes and crosses may be numerical, practical, decorative, or accidental. Scholars must distinguish formal signs from the many marks people make during manufacture and use. The line between writing and notation is not always clear. A set of scratches indicating quantity may communicate meaning without representing speech. A potter's symbol may identify a workshop without spelling its name. Such systems can exist alongside writing and even share some of the same shapes. Copper tools and tablets occasionally bear inscriptions as well. Signs appear on blades, celts vessels, and small plates. These are rarer than seals or pottery marks, but they show that writing was not limited to one material. An inscribed metal object may have marked ownership, dedication, value, or authorized use. Because copper could be melted and recycled, the surviving examples may represent only a fraction of what once existed. Metal objects were too valuable to abandon casually. Ornaments also carry signs. Bangles, beads, shell pieces, and other personal items sometimes bear short markings. These may have identified makers or wearers, but they could also hold protective or ritual significance. An inscription worn against the body belongs to a different social space from one stamped onto cargo. It enters dress, memory, and personal presentation. Even a single symbol might have been immediately recognizable to people within the culture, like an emblem whose meaning required no full sentence. The distribution of inscriptions suggests that literacy, or at least familiarity with signs, existed across several areas of urban life. This does not mean everyone could read or write. Seal carving may have been controlled by specialists, while merchants and officials recognized complete designs without understanding every sign independently. A person can use a symbol effectively without possessing full literacy. Modern people do this constantly with logos, numbers, badges, and traffic signs. The Indus system may have combined linguistic reading with visual recognition. One lesser-known clue comes from imperfect inscriptions. Some signs are cramped, reversed, omitted, or corrected. These irregularities reveal human makers working within conventions. A carver might misjudge the available space and squeeze the final sign against the edge. Another might cut a symbol in an unusual orientation. Such errors matter because they show that the sequences were copied or composed according to expected forms. Mistakes only exist where rules exist. What those rules communicated remains uncertain, but the archaeological context narrow the possibilities. The script accompanied exchange, storage, production, travel, and personal display. It was pressed onto clay and scratched onto pots. It moved through workshops and homes. It may have protected goods, authenticated people, categorized objects, invoked institutions, or preserved names. Its shortness was not necessarily a limitation to those who used it. A few signs, combined with material, shape, animal, image, and context, may have conveyed everything required. The script guarded the civilization not because it was hidden, but because it was everywhere in forms too brief for outsiders to unlock. Its meaning lived in routines that no longer survive. To read a seal correctly, one may have needed to know who carried it, what animal it displayed, where it was used, what was being transferred, and which institution recognized its authority. The signs were only one part of the message. The rest was the living city around them. Above the backs of bulls, elephants, rhinoceroses, and the strange one-horned creature, the signs seem almost restrained. They occupy a narrow band, usually neat, compact, and carefully separated from the animal below. Yet the relationship between image and inscription may be one of the central keys to the entire system. The animals are too consistent to be random decoration, and the texts are too short to explain them in any obvious way. Together they form a repeated visual formula, symbol, sequence above powerful creature below, sometimes facing an object whose purpose remains uncertain. To the people of the Indus cities, this arrangement must have been immediately legible. To modern eyes, it is a puzzle built from two unknown languages at once. The most common animal is the so-called unicorn. It has the body of a bull or antelope, a long neck, a single projecting horn, and often a carefully patterned collar or mane. It usually stands before a narrow object with a bowl-like top and a vertical base. Early excavators described this object in several ways, including a manger or ritual stand. Later interpretations have proposed a filter incense burner, offering device or ceremonial emblem. None has been proved. The creature itself may be imaginary, but even that is not certain. Some scholars have suggested that it represents a real bull, shown in strict profile with the second horn hidden behind the first. Others argue that the horn is too distinctive and deliberately shaped for this explanation to work. Its dominance is difficult to ignore. The unicorn appears on more seals than any real animal, often paired with inscriptions that differ from one another. This suggests that it did not simply represent a single person. It may have referred to a broad institution, social group, region, occupation, or ritual tradition. The varying texts above it could identify individuals within that category, much as different names might appear beneath the same official emblem. But the reverse is also possible. The animal may have represented a personal or family symbol, while the inscription stated a title, place, or formula. Without knowing which part of the design carried the main identity, interpretation remains unstable. Other animals appear less frequently but with equal precision. Humped bulls are shown with heavy shoulders and sweeping horns. Elephants stand in profile with controlled, almost formal stillness. Rhinoceroses, buffalo tigers, and composite creatures occupy their own limited visual categories. Their distribution may reflect different communities or offices. Certain animals are more common at some sites than others, though no simple regional map explains all examples. The animals could represent clans, merchant houses, administrative departments, deities, territories, or ranks within a larger system. The temptation to call them clan symbols is strong because animals often serve that function in many societies. A household lineage or corporate group can rally around an emblem that remains recognizable even to people who cannot read. A seal bearing a bull might therefore identify its owner as belonging to a particular descent group or commercial association. Yet this model raises questions. Why are some animals extremely common and others rare? Why does the unicorn dominate across such a large area? Why do inscriptions above the same animal vary so widely? A clan system might explain some patterns, but no single explanation fully accounts for the evidence. A religious interpretation presents another possibility. Animals may have represented divine beings, sacred powers, or ritual identities. The object before the unicorn may be an altar or offering stand. A seal could therefore show a deity or sacred animal receiving an offering, while the inscription names a worshipper, temple priest, or ritual formula. The great bath figurines, animal imagery, and carefully structured symbols all suggest that ritual was important in Indus society, but the script cannot confirm how these practices were organized. There are no readable hymns, dedications, or temple inventories to connect image and belief. The famous seal showing a seated human-like figure surrounded by animals adds to the uncertainty. The figure wears a horned headdress and sits in a posture that some observers have compared to later yogic poses. It has often been linked to a prototype of the Hindu god Shiva, particularly in his association with animals. This interpretation is widely known but remains disputed. The chronological distance is vast and visual resemblance does not establish direct religious continuity. The seal may depict a deity, ritual specialist, ruler, masked performer, or symbolic scene, whose meaning has no surviving descendant. Other seals show processions, confrontations, human figures near trees or animals combined in unnatural forms. A body may carry features from several species. A horned figure may stand beside a plant. A human appears to struggle with powerful animals. Such images hint at myths, ceremonies, protective stories, or social symbols. They may have been as familiar to Indus viewers as well-known religious scenes are to later cultures. Yet a modern observer sees only the final moment of a story whose beginning and ending are missing. The signs above these images may contain names, but even this basic assumption is unproven. Many seal-using cultures place the owner's name and title beside an emblem or portrait. If Indus seals follow the same principle, repeated sign, sequences may identify common professions or offices, while rarer signs represent personal names. Researchers have searched for patterns resembling titles, followed by names, or names followed by institutional markers. Some signs recur at predictable positions, especially near the end of inscriptions, which could indicate grammatical endings, classifiers, or official designations. A jar-like sign, for example, appears frequently near the end of texts. It may represent a word-sound-suffix unit or category. Fish-shaped signs also occur in several forms, sometimes modified by strokes or additional elements. Some decipherment attempts assign them astronomical or religious meanings. Others treat them as phonetic signs. A fish may depict an actual fish, but it could also represent a sound based on the word for fish in the unknown language. This rebus principle is common in early writing systems. A picture is used not for its meaning, but for the sound of the word it depicts. That possibility has encouraged scholars to test proposed underlying languages. In some Dravidian languages, for example, words for fish can resemble words associated with stars, which has led to interpretations connecting fish signs with celestial meanings. Such proposals are ingenious, and some may eventually prove useful, but they depend on assumptions about language that cannot yet be independently verified. A convincing reading must explain many inscriptions consistently, not just produce an attractive interpretation for one sign. There may also be numerical information embedded in the texts. Simple vertical strokes occur in groups and could represent numbers, quantities, or grammatical distinctions. Signs with repeated marks may indicate multiples or modified values. If seals were used in trade numbers would be expected. Yet the inscriptions rarely look like straightforward accounts. They are too short, and the same sequences recur in ways that may better fit names, formulas, or categories. A seal may identify who controls a shipment without recording how much it contains. The animal image could have carried information that reduced the need for longer text. A merchant seeing a unicorn emblem might immediately know the issuing institution. The signs above it might specify the individual or office. The material and shape of the seal might indicate rank. Its find location could determine its function. Meaning was therefore layered across image, text, object, and context. Modern decipherment often isolates the signs, but the original users may have read the entire artifact as a single statement. This helps explain why the inscriptions are so brief without necessarily being simple. A modern passport coin badge or company seal communicates far more than its written words alone. Authority comes from recognized symbols, materials, formats, and issuing bodies. The Indus seals may have worked in a similar way. Their animals were not illustrations added after the message. They were part of the message. The civilization's silent names may still be present on thousands of seals repeated in patterns that scholars can measure but not pronounce. A bull may belong to a merchant house. A rhinoceros may mark a district. A unicorn may stand for an institution whose influence crossed the entire Indus world. The signs may name people who walked through Harappa's gates, supervised workshops, guarded storage rooms, or sent goods toward distant seas, But until image and inscription can be read together, the seals continue to present identities without revealing them. Beyond the brick streets and river plains, the Indus world extends toward coastlines, deserts, mountain passes, and foreign ports. Its people are not sealed inside their cities. They move stone shell, timber metal, grain beads, textiles, and ideas across distances that would have seemed immense in the Bronze Age. Boats follow rivers toward the Arabian Sea. Caravans cross dry country between settlements. Traders pass through regions that connect South Asia with the Iranian plateau, Central Asia, Oman, Bahrain, and Mesopotamia. Somewhere within these journeys the unread script travels too. Mesopotamian records refer to a distant land called Meluha, widely identified by many scholars with the Indus region, or territories closely connected to it. The identification is not absolutely certain in every context, but the material evidence makes the connection persuasive. Mesopotamian texts describe ships arriving from Meluha and list exotic goods associated with distant eastern trade. Archaeologists in Mesopotamia and the Persian Gulf have recovered Indus-style seals, etched carnelian beads, shell objects, and other materials whose origins point toward South Asia. These objects prove that the civilization was known beyond its own borders, even if its native name remains hidden. The journey westward likely followed several routes. Coastal vessels could move along the shores of the Arabian Sea, stopping at ports in Makran and Oman before entering the Persian Gulf. Sailors did not need to cross open ocean in a single voyage. They could remain near land, travelling between sheltered inlets and seasonal anchorages. Winds and currents shaped the rhythm of movement, while knowledge of tides, reefs, fresh water sources, and safe landing places passed between generations. Such travel required skill, organization, and trust between communities that did not share the same language. Indus settlements near the coast reveal this maritime orientation. At sites in Gujarat and along the Makran region, archaeologists find evidence of shell-working bead production storage and contact with overseas materials. The city of Lothal is often presented as a major port because of its large brick basin and location near ancient waterways. The interpretation of the basin as a dockyard remains debated, especially because river channels and coastal landscapes have changed dramatically since the Bronze Age. Even so, Lothal's craft industries and geographic position show that it participated in exchange networks reaching far beyond the local countryside. Farther west, the settlement of Sutkagandur lies near the Makran coast, close to routes connecting the Indus zone with Iran. Today it stands in a dry and remote landscape, but ancient shorelines and watercourses differed from those of the present. Its fortified appearance and position suggest that it may have served as a trading station, frontier settlement, or control point along the western edge of the civilization. The existence of such places shows that Indus exchange was not a single line between two capitals. It was a chain of settlements, intermediaries, seasonal camps, coastal communities, and foreign partners. Oman played a particularly important role because its mountains contained copper ore. Copper was essential for tools, vessels, ornaments, and alloy production, yet good sources were unevenly distributed. Indus pottery and artifacts found in Oman indicate direct or indirect contact. Omani copper may have moved eastward while Indus goods moved west. Traders could exchange carnelian beads, cotton textiles, food products, timber ivory, or finished crafts for metal and other resources. Many of these materials decay, leaving archaeology with only the most durable fragments of a much larger commercial system. Bahrain, known in Mesopotamian sources as Dilmun, became a key intermediary in Gulf trade. Its position allowed merchants to connect Mesopotamia-Oman and lands farther east. Indus-style seals have been found there alongside locally made seals that combine foreign influences. These hybrid objects are especially revealing. They suggest not merely passing contact but communities accustomed to dealing across cultural boundaries. A merchant in Dilmun may have recognized several sealing traditions, currencies of trust and systems of measurement. The Indus script may have been readable to only a few people there, yet its visual authority could still have been understood. This is where the script's silence becomes most frustrating. Long-distance trade often produces bilingual texts. Merchants need translations. Officials record foreign names. Scribes copy treaties, cargo lists, or dedications in more than one language. The Rosetta Stone exists because a decree was written in multiple scripts. In the ancient Near East, bilingual and multilingual inscriptions later became crucial for decipherment. The Indus trade network seems to offer the perfect setting for such an object, but none has been securely identified. A seal bearing both Indus signs and cuneiform would transform the field. Even a short text containing the same personal name in two systems could provide a starting point. A Mesopotamian tablet listing an identifiable Indus merchant beside the impression of that merchant's seal might link sounds to signs. Yet the surviving evidence never makes that connection clearly enough. Indus seals found abroad usually retain only the Indus script. Mesopotamian texts mention foreign traders and goods, but no inscription securely matches a specific Indus object. One Mesopotamian record refers to an interpreter of the Meluhan language. The existence of such an official or specialist suggests that communication required mediation. It also implies that Meluhan speakers were present in Mesopotamian society, in numbers sufficient to make interpretation useful. Some may have lived in merchant communities near ports or cities. They could have adopted local languages for business, while retaining their own speech and symbols within their group. The interpreter is a tantalizing human trace. Someone once stood between two languages, understanding a speech that has now disappeared from history. Mesopotamian scribes attempted to record foreign names using cuneiform, but identifying which names are genuinely Indus remains difficult. A foreign merchant might use a local nickname. A scribe might distort unfamiliar sounds. Meluha itself may refer to a broad region rather than a single ethnic or linguistic community. Even where names survive, there is no reliable method for matching them to sign sequences on Indus seals. The bridge almost exists, but it stops before reaching the opposite bank. The movement of weights offers another clue. Indus-style cubical weights appear at sites involved in overseas trade, though local systems often remained in use. Merchants operating across regions had to convert values, compare quantities, and negotiate standards. A seal may have certified that a shipment had been measured according to a recognized system. The animal emblem could identify the issuing authority, while the text named the responsible merchant or institution. Such a practice would allow goods to move through several hands without every participant sharing the same spoken language. Etched carnelian beads provide one of the clearest signatures of Indus craftsmanship abroad. Their white designs fixed against polished red stone are technically distinctive. Examples found in Mesopotamian royal and elite contexts show that these objects carried prestige. Some travelled far from the workshops where they were made. A bead could pass through merchants' ports and courts before reaching a tomb, while the people who produced it remained unnamed. Trade preserves the object but erases much of the human chain behind it. Scholars still debate whether Indus merchants travelled personally to Mesopotamia in large numbers, or whether much of the exchange passed through intermediaries. The evidence suggests that at least some individuals from the east were present, but the scale of direct migration remains uncertain. Ships may have carried mixed crews. Gulf merchants may have transported Indus cargo. Foreign traders may have lived in Indus ports. Commercial networks are rarely controlled by a single people from beginning to end. What survives in the record suggests a civilization deeply connected to the wider Bronze Age world. Its seals reach foreign shores, its beads enter distant graves, its goods are named in another civilization's records, its language is heard by interpreters in Mesopotamian cities. Yet the one object that could unlock the script to secure bilingual inscription never appears. Trade carried almost everything across the sea except the key modern scholars need. The civilization spoke beyond its borders, but history preserved only the fact that someone once understood. The script remains locked not because scholars have failed to study it, but because nearly every condition required for decipherment is missing at once. There are thousands of inscriptions, yet most are painfully short. There are hundreds of signs, yet the language behind them is unknown. There are repeated patterns, yet no secure bilingual text connects those patterns to readable words. There are archaeological contexts, yet many objects were excavated before modern recording methods could preserve every detail of where and how they were found. The problem is not a shortage of intelligence, it is a shortage of leverage. A long text gives a decipherer room to work. Repeated words can be identified. Grammatical endings can be compared. Names, titles, and formulas can emerge through frequency. Sentence structure begins to reveal itself. The Indus inscriptions rarely provide such opportunities. The average text contains only a handful of signs. Many consist of fewer than 5. Even the longest widely accepted examples are short by the standards of ancient writing. There is no surviving royal decree extending across a wall, no funerary prayer repeated in dozens of tombs, no administrative archive containing thousands of related entries. This brevity creates a statistical trap. A sequence of 4 or 5 signs can support many possible readings. It might be a personal name, a title, a commodity, a place, a religious formula, or a mixture of these. If a proposed decipherment produces a plausible phrase, there may be no longer text available to test whether the same rules continue to work. Almost any theory can succeed briefly when the evidence is brief. The difficulty lies in explaining hundreds of inscriptions consistently without changing the values of signs whenever the interpretation becomes inconvenient. The number of signs adds another layer of uncertainty. Depending on how variants are counted, researchers identify several hundred distinct forms. Some signs may be genuinely separate characters. Others may be the same basic sign written differently by different carvers in different regions or at different times. A fish shape with one added stroke might represent a new sign, a modified sound, a grammatical ending, or merely a stylistic variation. Determining the sign list is therefore part of the decipherment problem rather than a simple preliminary step. If the system contains around 400 basic signs, it is probably not a simple alphabet. Alphabets usually require far fewer characters, because each sign represents a consonant or vowel. The Indus script may instead be logosyllabic, combining signs for whole words with signs for syllables as in several ancient writing systems. It may also include numerical marks, classifiers, determinatives, or symbols that indicate categories without being spoken aloud. Yet even this remains an inference from sign counts and patterns, not a demonstrated fact. The unknown language is perhaps the greatest obstacle. When Egyptian hieroglyphs were deciphered, scholars already knew Coptic, a descendant of ancient Egyptian. When cuneiform systems were unlocked, several languages and bilingual inscriptions helped establish sign values. For the Indus script, there is no agreed linguistic descendant. The civilization occupied a huge and diverse region, and its inhabitants may have spoken more than one language. The language written on seals could have been used by administrators, merchants, or ritual specialists without representing the speech of every community. Modern linguistic families offer possible clues. but none provide certainty. Dravidian languages are now concentrated mainly in southern India, though some are spoken farther north and west. Indo-Aryan languages dominate much of northern South Asia today, but their early arrival and relationship to the late Indus world remain subjects of complex archaeological and linguistic debate. Munda languages form another branch with deep roots in parts of the subcontinent. Beyond these may have existed languages that disappeared without leaving known descendants. This script could encode one of them, or a language family not securely identified at all. Personal names would usually provide a foothold, especially if connected to foreign records. But no Indus ruler is known by name. No inscription can be tied securely to a historical person mentioned elsewhere. The Mesopotamian references to Meluha confirm contact, but do not identify a specific sequence of Indus signs. Even if a foreign tablet preserves the name of a Meluhan merchant, there is no way to know which seal belonged to that individual. Without a fixed point, proposed readings drift. The absence of clear word dividers makes segmentation difficult. A row of signs may contain one long expression or several short words. A sign repeated at the end of many inscriptions might be a suffix title, classifier, or independent word. A group of strokes might represent a number attached to a commodity, but it could also form part of a name. Researchers can identify positional tendencies, yet they cannot agree on what linguistic function those positions express. Direction adds another complication. Most seal inscriptions are thought to read from right to left, partly because signs near the left edge sometimes appear compressed as though the carver ran out of space. Seal impressions reverse the carved design, which can create confusion when objects are published without careful distinction between the original and its stamped image. Some inscriptions may run left to right, and a few longer examples may be arranged in alternating directions. Damaged surfaces, rotated objects, and uncertain starting points can alter statistical analysis. Chronology also matters. The script was used across centuries and an enormous geographic area. Signs may have changed over time. Regional scribal traditions may have preferred different forms or formulas. A sequence common at Harappa might be rare at Dolavira for reasons of dialect institution or chronology. Yet many finds come from disturbed layers, old excavations, or contexts that cannot be dated precisely. Combining all inscriptions into a single dataset may conceal historical change, while dividing them too aggressively leaves samples too small to analyze. Archaeological loss has been severe. Harappa suffered extensive brick removal during railway construction. Mohenjo-Daro has been damaged by erosion, rising groundwater salt, and repeated exposure. Countless settlements remain unexcavated beneath fields, towns, desert deposits, or river sediments. Organic writing materials would almost certainly have decayed in most environments. If longer texts were written on wood, bark, cloth, leather, or leaves, they may have vanished completely. The surviving seals could represent the equivalent of signatures and labels from a culture that once produced much longer documents. This possibility is both hopeful and discouraging. It explains why the script appears so compressed, but it also means that the evidence needed for decipherment may no longer exist. A seal system can preserve repeated names and titles without preserving enough grammar to reconstruct a language. Scholars may eventually identify some function signs or numerical patterns, while remaining unable to read complete inscriptions in the ordinary sense. Modern technology helps, but it cannot manufacture missing context. Digital databases allow researchers to compare signs across thousands of objects. High-resolution imaging reveals faint strokes and carving order. Statistical models test whether sequences behave more like language than random symbol strings. Computer programs can detect clusters invisible to the human eye. Yet algorithms work only with the data they receive. A machine can identify that one sign frequently follows another, but it cannot decide whether the pair means King Merchant Grain Temple or a personal name without external evidence. The most dangerous weakness is that uncertainty leaves room for confirmation bias. A researcher who begins convinced that the language is Dravidian may find Dravidian readings. Another who expects Indo-Aryan may produce Indo-Aryan interpretations. A religious theory may discover gods in fish signs and sacred trees. A commercial theory may see weights, goods, and titles. Each proposal can illuminate certain patterns while ignoring others. No single explanation fully accounts for the script because too many unknowns can be adjusted to rescue a preferred reading. A successful decipherment would need to do more than sound plausible. It would need to identify sign values consistently, explain grammar produce, meaningful readings across many inscriptions fit, archaeological contexts, account for regional and chronological variation, and make predictions that later discoveries confirm. Ideally, it would be anchored by a bilingual text or a secure connection to a known language. Until then, the script remains not a puzzle with one missing piece, but a locked mechanism whose key instructions and original purpose are all uncertain. If the signs belong to language, then somewhere behind their repeated shapes lies a vanished grammar, a system of sounds and a vocabulary once spoken in streets, workshops, fields, ports and courtyards across the Indus world. Finding that language would not automatically solve the script, but it would narrow the field. A proposed reading could be tested against real words and grammatical patterns. Names might become recognizable. Repeated endings might reveal case number, profession, or ownership. Yet the search for the hidden language has produced not one secure answer, but several competing possibilities, each supported by fragments and weakened by what the evidence cannot show. The most influential hypothesis connects the script to an early Dravidian language. Today, the largest Dravidian languages are spoken mainly in southern India, but the family is not confined entirely to the south. Brahui, a Dravidian language, is spoken in parts of modern Pakistan far closer to the former Indus heartland. This has often been treated as a surviving northern trace, though linguists debate whether Brahui represents ancient continuity or a later migration. Language geography changes over thousands of years, and the modern distribution of a family cannot simply be projected backward without supporting evidence. The Dravidian hypothesis draws strength from several directions. Some ancient loanwords in early Indo-Aryan languages may have come from Dravidian sources, suggesting contact between different linguistic populations in prehistoric South Asia. Agricultural and cultural terms have been examined for signs of such borrowing. Scholars have also compared possible Indus symbols with reconstructed Dravidian words, especially through the rebus principle, in which a picture represents a word that sounds like another word. A fish sign, for example, might be read using a Dravidian word for fish, and then interpreted through a similar sounding word for star deity brightness, or another concept. This approach has produced elaborate proposed readings. Modified fish signs have been connected to different celestial bodies' titles or divine names. Jar-like signs have been interpreted through words for vessels that also resemble words for social roles or attributes. If the underlying language is Dravidian, such sound associations could be meaningful. Early writing systems often use exactly this kind of visual wordplay. A picture of an object becomes a sound sign because the object's name resembles another word that is harder to draw. The problem is that reconstructed vocabulary is uncertain, especially across 4,000 years. A word known from a later language may not have existed in the same form during the Bronze Age. Sound changes can alter pronunciation. Meanings shift. Related languages borrow from one another. With hundreds of signs and thousands of possible words, it is possible to find accidental resemblances. A convincing rebus reading must work repeatedly across many inscriptions, and produce consistent grammar, not merely create a plausible interpretation for a small number of symbols. Another hypothesis proposes that the script records an early Indo-Aryan or broader Indo-Iranian language. Supporters connect the Indus civilization with traditions later preserved in Vedic literature, arguing for cultural or linguistic continuities across the 2nd millennium BCE. Some propose decipherment search for early Sanskrit words, divine names, social titles or ritual concepts in the inscriptions. The attraction is obvious. Indo-Aryan languages later become dominant across northern South Asia, and Sanskrit preserves one of the region's richest ancient textual traditions. Chronology, however, creates serious difficulties. Mainstream linguistic and archaeological models generally place the spread of Indo-Aryan languages into South Asia, during or after the decline of the mature Indus cities, though the timing, route, scale, and nature of those movements remain debated. The oldest Vedic texts reflect a world different from the major urban environment of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. Horses, chariots, cattle, wealth ritual poetry, and mobile pastoral elements occupy prominent places in Vedic tradition, while the Indus archaeological record is defined by cities, maritime trade, standardized weights, and a different symbolic repertoire. This does not rule out contact overlap or later cultural inheritance. The decline of the cities was gradual and populations did not disappear. Languages can spread without complete population replacement. Indo-Aryan speakers may have encountered descendants of Indus communities, adopted local words, and absorbed regional practices. But identifying the mature Indus script directly with Sanskrit or Vedic language requires stronger evidence than cultural resemblance. Many proposed Sanskrit decipherments have failed to produce consistent readings across the full corpus. Political and national identity sometimes intensify this debate. The script is not merely an academic problem. It has become entangled with questions about ancestry, migration, cultural ownership, and the age of later traditions. Some writers seek to prove that a preferred language has always belonged to the region. Others use the script to support modern ethnic or religious claims. Such motivations do not automatically make a theory false, but they increase the risk that conclusions will be chosen before evidence is evaluated. The dead civilization becomes a mirror in which modern societies search for themselves. A third possibility points toward Munda or other Austroasiatic languages. Munda languages are now spoken primarily in eastern and central India, but their prehistoric distribution may have been wider. Some linguists identify possible Munda influences in South Asian agricultural vocabulary and place names. If communities speaking related languages once occupied parts of the northwest, their speech could have contributed to the Indus linguistic landscape. Yet the evidence connecting Munda specifically to the script is limited, and proposed readings have not gained broad acceptance. The civilization may also have used a language with no surviving descendants. This possibility is less satisfying because it offers no familiar vocabulary to test, but it may be the most cautious. History is filled with extinct language families. Sumerian survives only because clay tablets preserved it. Etruscan left inscriptions but remains imperfectly understood. Many ancient languages disappeared without written records or living relatives. The Indus region, with its immense area and diverse environments, could easily have contained languages that vanished during later migrations and cultural transformations. It is also possible that the script records more than one language. The civilization covered a territory larger than many contemporary states. Farmers in river valleys, herders in dry uplands, merchants on the coast and communities near mountain passes may not all have spoken the same tongue. A standardized script could serve an administrative language shared across regions, much as cuneiform was adapted to several languages. Alternatively, the signs may represent a restricted code used by traders or officials, reducing the importance of everyday speech. Place names offer few secure clues. Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, Dolavira, Lothal, and other modern labels do not preserve confirmed ancient names. Rivers may retain extremely old names, but tracing them backward is hazardous. A name can survive while passing through several languages, changing pronunciation and meaning. Some South Asian place names appear resistant to explanation through later languages, possibly preserving traces of lost linguistic layers, yet none can be securely matched to an Indus inscription. Foreign records are equally frustrating. Meluha may represent the Indus region, but the word itself comes through Mesopotamian writing and pronunciation. It may be an outsider's name rather than what Indus people called their land. The interpreter of Meluhan mentioned in a Mesopotamian text confirms linguistic difference, but not the identity of the language. A few foreign personal names have been proposed as Meluhan, though their forms remain too uncertain to connect with signs. What survives in the record suggests that the Indus world stood at a linguistic crossroads. Mountains linked it with Central and Western Asia. Coasts opened toward the Gulf. River plains connected distant settlements across the subcontinent. Trade carried foreign speech into ports and marketplaces. Local communities likely maintained their own dialects and identities beneath the shared material culture. The script may encode one voice among many, rather than the language of an entire civilization. This is why every linguistic proposal remains provisional. Dravidian offers suggestive vocabulary and possible historical depth. Indo-Aryan offers later regional dominance and complex cultural continuities. Munda and other families preserve evidence of older linguistic layers. A lost language explains the lack of clear descendants, but provides little material for testing. Scholars still debate how these populations interacted, and archaeology cannot recover speech directly. The hidden language may be present in later South Asian languages only as scattered loanwords names for plants, animals, crops, tools, landscapes, or social practices that survived after the original grammar disappeared. Its speakers may have contributed ancestry and culture to many later communities without preserving a distinct linguistic identity. The script guards them not behind complete silence, but behind echoes too faint to assign with confidence. Even when the signs refuse to yield their meanings, they still reveal behavior. They repeat cluster, avoid certain positions, and form combinations that occur too regularly to dismiss as decorative accident. A sign appearing often at the end of inscriptions may serve a different function from one that usually begins them. A rare symbol surrounded by common ones may represent a name title, place, or specialized term. A group of vertical strokes may indicate quantity. None of this tells scholars what the inscriptions say, but it allows them to study the architecture of the message before understanding the words. The first task is to establish the corpus itself. Thousands of inscribed objects have been reported from sites across Pakistan, India, Afghanistan, Iran, and the Persian Gulf, but their quality varies. Some are complete seals with clear archaeological contexts. Others are damaged pottery fragments bearing only one or two uncertain marks. Old excavation reports may publish hand-drawn copies rather than photographs. Signs can be misread when surfaces are worn broken or coated with mineral deposits. A crack may resemble a stroke. A carving may be incomplete. Before patterns can be trusted, researchers must decide which marks belong to the script and which result from damaged decoration counting or later disturbance. This is more difficult than it sounds. Two signs that look similar may be distinct characters, while two apparently different forms may be regional or stylistic versions of the same one. A fish shape with a diagonal line might represent a separate sign, a modified value or an accidental scratch. A jar sign with a short extension could belong to a family of related forms. Every decision changes the number of signs and the statistics built from them. If variants are separated too aggressively, the script appears larger and more complex than it may have been. If they are merged too freely, genuine distinctions disappear. Once a working sign list is established, frequency becomes important. A small number of signs occur repeatedly while many appear rarely. This uneven distribution is common in writing systems because some sounds, words, and grammatical elements are used far more often than others. In English, certain letters appear constantly while others are scarce. In a locosyllabic script, common words, suffixes, classifiers, and syllables dominate the record. The Indus corpus shows a comparable imbalance, though non-linguistic symbol systems can also produce uneven frequencies. Position strengthens the case for structure. Some signs appear mainly at the beginning of texts, others strongly favor the final position. Certain symbols almost never stand alone. Some pairs recur in the same order while the reversed order is rare or absent. This suggests that the inscriptions are not simple collections of emblems arranged freely by each seal owner. Their makers followed conventions about sequence. The signs behave as though order changes or constrains meaning. A frequently occurring terminal sign, sometimes compared in shape to a jar or vessel, has attracted particular attention. Its repeated position could indicate a suffix title, commodity, class institutional marker, or grammatical ending. Signs preceding it vary, producing patterns that might resemble different names followed by the same office. Another interpretation treats the preceding symbols as numerals or quantities attached to a standardized unit. Both models can explain some examples, but neither explains the entire corpus without difficulty. Researchers have also identified sign sequences that resemble prefixes and suffixes. A short group may recur at the beginning of several inscriptions followed by changing signs. Elsewhere, different openings lead to the same ending. This can be interpreted linguistically as a fixed grammatical element attached to variable words. It can also be interpreted administratively as a standard category, followed by a specific identifier. A modern license plate has predictable positions and restricted combinations, but it does not encode a spoken sentence. Structure alone therefore proves organization, not necessarily language. The length of the inscriptions is itself patterned. Most are short, but they are not all equally short. Some contain a single sign, while others extend to 10 or more. Certain object types favor particular lengths. Stamp seals often contain compact sequences paired with animals. Tablets may arrange signs across several surfaces. Pottery marks tend to be shorter and less formal. These differences suggest that the medium influenced the message. A seal used for identification needed only a concise formula, while another object might carry a more complex record. Direction can be studied through crowding. On many seals, the signs at one edge appear more compressed than those at the other, implying that the carver began with comfortable spacing and ran short of room near the end. This supports reading from right to left on most examples. Animal orientation also offers a clue because the creatures generally face toward the presumed beginning of the inscription. Yet exceptions exist, and some objects may have been copied incorrectly or designed for impressions rather than direct viewing. Statistical conclusions must therefore remain flexible. Computer analysis has made these patterns easier to compare. Digital corpora allow researchers to count how often each sign appears where it occurs and which signs tend to neighbor it. Measures of conditional probability can estimate how predictable one symbol is after another. Some studies have argued that Indus sign sequences show a degree of order comparable to known linguistic systems. They are neither completely repetitive nor entirely random. Their balance between predictability and variation resembles structured communication, This result has been widely discussed because it appears to support the claim that the signs encode language. Yet the conclusion must be handled carefully. Many non-linguistic systems also occupy a middle ground between randomness and rigid repetition. Heraldic emblems, ritual sequences, mathematical notation, biological codes, and administrative labels can all produce structured patterns. Statistical similarity does not reveal what kind of information is being transmitted. It only shows that the signs are arranged according to constraints. The strongest analyses therefore avoid asking computers to translate the script. Instead, they use statistical tools to test specific features. Does one sign family behave like numerical notation? Are certain sequences limited to particular regions? Do late inscriptions differ from early ones? Are rare signs concentrated on high-status materials? Can repeated sign groups be associated with particular animal images? These questions connect pattern with archaeology, where meaningful progress is more likely. Some intriguing associations have emerged. Certain sign sequences appear more often with specific animals, suggesting that image and text were not combined randomly. A particular emblem may define a broad category within which the inscription names a person or office. Alternatively, the text may classify the animal symbol itself. Regional variation also appears, though the samples are uneven. Some sites favor sign combinations rarely seen elsewhere. This could reflect local institutions, dialects, chronology, or differences in economic activity. Numerical interpretation remains especially promising because numbers often have simple visual forms. Groups of vertical strokes could represent units, and signs with enclosed marks may indicate larger values or standardized measures. Indus weights followed highly regular systems, so written notation for quantity would be expected. Yet suspected numerals do not always occur where a simple accounting model predicts. They may be embedded in names, dates, ranks, or ritual formulas. A sequence of 3 strokes may mean 3, but what is being counted remains unknown. One lesser-known complication is that some inscriptions may be abbreviated. If a seal represented an individual already known within a commercial network, only a few signs were needed. A repeated title could be reduced to one symbol. An institution might be represented by an animal rather than written phonetically. Such compression would make the script appear less grammatical than longer texts on perishable materials. The surviving corpus may therefore preserve labels rather than complete language. What survives in the pattern suggests disciplined communication. Signs were not selected freely. Their order mattered. Their position mattered. Their combination with images and objects mattered. The system had rules that were understood across a large territory and maintained for centuries. But rules do not automatically produce speech. They may belong to language bureaucracy, ritual identity, or several of these at once. The script can therefore be mapped without being read. Scholars can identify its busiest intersections, its restricted pathways, and the signs that behave like entrances or endings. They can see where combinations are permitted and where they are avoided. It is like studying the street plan of an abandoned city from above while every building remains locked. The structure is visible. Movement can be inferred. What happened inside each room remains hidden. The most unsettling possibility is not that the script has resisted decipherment, but that it may never have been writing in the ordinary sense at all. This argument does not claim that the signs are meaningless. On the contrary, they may have carried precise social, political, religious, or economic information. The question is whether they encoded spoken language with words and grammar, or whether they functioned as a structured emblem system that communicated without representing speech. If the second possibility is correct, then the search for phonetic values and lost sentences may be aimed at a language that was never placed inside the signs. The dispute begins with brevity. Most Indus inscriptions are extremely short, often containing fewer than 5 signs. Even societies that use writing mainly for administration usually leave longer records, somewhere lists, inventories, dedications, contracts, tax accounts, or funerary texts. The Indus civilization was large, urban, commercially connected, and technologically sophisticated, yet no securely identified inscription approaches the length expected from a full writing tradition. There are no paragraphs, no obvious sentences, and no documents displaying extended grammatical structure. Supporters of the non-linguistic interpretation argue that this absence is not merely the result of poor preservation. Seals, pottery, copper, stone, and other durable materials survive in substantial numbers. If people regularly wrote longer messages on these surfaces, at least a few should have endured. The overwhelming dominance of very short sequences may therefore reflect the nature of the system itself. The signs could have operated like heraldic devices, religious emblems, institutional labels, family symbols, or administrative codes. Such systems can be highly organized without encoding a spoken language word by word. A modern comparison helps clarify the distinction. A row of flags, military insignia, mathematical symbols, or corporate logos can communicate identity, rank, warning ownership, or affiliation. Their order may follow strict rules. Certain symbols may appear only beside others. Some may belong at the beginning or end of a sequence. Statistical analysis would detect structure, yet no underlying sentence needs to exist. The symbols function because users know the conventions, not because they sound them out as speech. Under this interpretation, an Indus seal might combine several layers of non-phonetic information. The animal could identify a major institution, lineage, region, or ritual community. A small group of signs might specify rank, office, workshop, or authorized function. Numerical strokes could indicate class or quantity. The seal's shape, material, and fine context could complete the message. A trained observer might understand the whole design instantly without reading it as a personal name or grammatical phrase. The proposal gained attention partly because of the apparent stability of the sign system. Some researchers argue that a true writing system used over many centuries should show clearer evolution, regional adaptation, or increasing complexity. The Indus signs appear remarkably standardized across a vast territory, though this impression may be influenced by uneven dating and incomplete excavation. A centrally maintained emblem system could remain stable, because its authority depended on fixed forms. Writing systems also remain conservative, however, especially when controlled by trained specialists, so stability alone cannot resolve the issue. The number of signs is equally ambiguous. Several hundred symbols could fit a logosyllabic script, but many appear only once or a few times. Critics of the writing interpretation suggest that some rare signs may be unique emblems rather than linguistic characters. A family official settlement or institution could possess its own distinctive symbol, increasing the total inventory without requiring hundreds of words or syllables. Supporters of writing reply that rare signs are normal in short corpora. Personal names, uncommon words, and damaged variants would naturally produce low frequencies. Another argument concerns repetition. In known administrative archives, the same words and formulas often recur constantly. Grain worker, king, temple, month, and number appear again and again. Indus inscriptions contain repeated signs and pairs, but exact full sequences are not repeated as often as some scholars expect. This could indicate that many inscriptions were individualized emblems rather than standardized written phrases. Yet seals belonging to different people would also be expected to contain different names, making exact repetition uncommon, even in a linguistic system. The debate becomes more difficult because writing does not exist as a simple yes or no category. Human societies use many systems between picture and full phonetic script. Numerical notations record quantity without representing complete speech. Ownership marks communicate identity. Rebus symbols use images for sounds only in certain contexts. Administrative signs may begin as emblems and gradually acquire phonetic values. The Indus system could belong somewhere along this spectrum, combining linguistic and non-linguistic elements. A seal might contain a personal name written phonetically beside an animal emblem that was never pronounced. A group of strokes might represent a number followed by a logogram for a commodity and an institutional symbol. Some signs could encode speech, while others acted as classifiers or sacred images. Early Egyptian and Mesopotamian writing also developed through mixtures of pictures, words, sounds, and numerical notation. Expecting every Indus sign to function in the same way may therefore impose a simplicity the original system never possessed. Archaeological context offers no decisive answer. These signs appear on objects associated with tradecraft administration and personal display, all settings where writing could be useful, but they also appear in ritual or symbolic scenes where emblems might be more appropriate. No school tablets have been securely identified. No clear writing exercises survive. There are no obvious alphabet lists or sign lists created by ancient learners. This absence may mean scribal education occurred on perishable materials, or it may mean the system required recognition rather than full literacy. The large signboard from D'Oliveira is often raised in this debate. Its prominent placement suggests a public message intended to be seen from a distance. It could have spelled the name of the city, a ruler, a building, or an institution. That would support writing. It could also have displayed a sequence of civic or sacred emblems recognizable without language. A modern viewer cannot choose between these options because the same evidence supports both. Statistical studies have attempted to determine whether the sign sequences resemble natural language. Some analyses find levels of predictability comparable to linguistic text, strengthening the writing hypothesis. Critics respond that structured non-linguistic systems can produce similar results, especially when sequences are short. The outcome depends on which inscriptions are included, how variants are classified, and what comparison systems are chosen. Computers can measure order, but they cannot tell whether that order was spoken. The dispute occasionally becomes sharper than the evidence deserves. Those who defend the script as writing may see the alternative as denying the civilization intellectual complexity. That reaction is understandable, but unnecessary. A non-phonetic system capable of regulating trade identity and institutions across such a large region would itself be a major achievement. Civilization does not require literature, and symbolic sophistication does not depend on representing speech. Conversely, those skeptical of full writing sometimes treat the absence of long texts as decisive, though preservation remains a serious unknown. Longer records may have existed on cloth bark, palm leaf, wooden boards, or other materials that decayed. Seal inscriptions could be only the durable remains of a broader scribal world. In Mesopotamia, clay preserves ordinary documents because it survives fire and burial unusually well. The Indus people may have preferred materials that left almost nothing behind. A humid floodplain is not kind to archives made from plants and wood. No single explanation fully accounts for the evidence. The signs possess structured order-stable forms and meaningful context. They may encode language. They may combine language with emblems. They may form a restricted notation system whose relationship to speech was limited. Each possibility changes what decipherment would mean. A full script might eventually reveal names, grammar, and lost words. A mixed system might yield only partial readings. A non-linguistic code might be reconstructed functionally without ever being pronounced. The question is therefore larger than whether the signs can be translated. It asks what the Indus people believed needed to be recorded. Perhaps they trusted memory oral instruction and living institutions for everything except identity and authorization. Perhaps their longest texts vanished while their smallest labels survived. Perhaps the seals were never intended to speak in sentences. They may have guarded the civilization through symbols that were understood only within the world that created them. When that world disappeared, the rules remained visible, but the act of recognition died with it. A silent script invites confident voices. The fewer fixed meanings the signs provide, the easier it becomes for a determined interpreter to place preferred meanings inside them. Over the past century, the Indus inscriptions have been declared readable many times. They have been presented as early Sanskrit ancient Tamil, a forgotten Dravidian language, a form of Sumerian, a system of numbers, astronomical notation, religious symbolism, and even evidence for cultures far removed from Bronze Age South Asia. Each proposed solution arrives with its own key. None has opened the entire door. This does not mean every attempt is equally weak. Serious decipherment requires imagination. Before a script can be read, someone must propose sign values, identify patterns, and take the risk of being wrong. The decipherments of Egyptian hieroglyphs and Mesopotamian cuneiform emerge through competing hypotheses, partial errors, and gradual correction. The problem with the Indus script is not that scholars make proposals. It is that the surviving evidence allows proposals to be protected from failure too easily. A researcher may begin with a sign resembling a fish. If the preferred language contains a useful word for fish that resembles a word for star god, light ruler, or wealth, the rebus principle can transform the image into almost any of those meanings. A second sign may resemble a Jahil plant comb or human figure. Another wordplay connection can then be found. A short inscription of 5 signs becomes a royal title, religious invocation, merchant's name, or astronomical statement. The result may sound coherent, but coherence is not proof. Human beings are highly skilled at discovering patterns when they already know what they hope to find. The strongest decipherment proposals attempt to work systematically. They define a language, assign stable values to signs, establish a reading direction, and apply the same rules across many inscriptions. Some Dravidian-based approaches have identified possible rebus readings, grammatical endings, and astronomical associations. Their supporters argue that repeated fish signs and terminal symbols fit reconstructed vocabulary and later cultural traditions. These proposals have generated important discussion and may preserve useful insights, yet they have not produced readings accepted across the field because too many sign values remain uncertain, and too many interpretations depend on later words whose Bronze Age forms cannot be verified. Indo-Aryan and Sanskrit-based decipherments face similar difficulties. Some authors claim to find Vedic deities' royal names, ritual formulas, or references to horses in the seals. Such readings often depend on identifying an image first, and then selecting a Sanskrit word that produces a desired sound or meaning. But a proposed method must explain why the same sign behaves consistently in different contexts. It must also fit the archaeological chronology and account for the full range of inscriptions, not merely a few famous examples. Most Sanskrit readings fail these tests or require frequent changes in sign value. The horse has become especially controversial because of its later importance in Indo-Aryan traditions. A seal image or damaged object identified as a horse can be used to support claims about language migration and cultural continuity. In one widely discussed case, an image presented as an Indus horse was criticized as a distortion of a damaged seal depicting another animal. The incident became a warning about how easily poor images, reversed photographs, or selective reconstruction can turn ambiguous evidence into apparent confirmation. National pride can make the problem worse. The Indus civilization is among the earliest great urban traditions of South Asia, so identifying its language carries symbolic weight. A decipherment can be used to claim that one modern linguistic, religious, or ethnic community stands closest to its creators. Such claims offer a direct line from the present into deep antiquity. But civilizations are rarely the exclusive ancestors of one later population. The Indus world covered a vast region and likely contained diverse communities whose descendants contributed to many later societies. Political motivation does not automatically invalidate research, but it can shape which evidence receives attention. Signs that support continuity are emphasized. Contradictions are reclassified as scribal errors. Alternative languages are dismissed before testing. Archaeological uncertainty is replaced by certainty because certainty is more useful in modern arguments. The script then ceases to be an ancient problem and becomes a territorial claim over the past. Fringe theories move even farther from the evidence. The inscriptions have been linked to Egyptians, Israelites, people, from Easter Island, lost continents, and imagined global civilizations. Visual similarities between signs are often treated as proof of contact. A trident-like symbol in one script is compared with a trident-like symbol somewhere else, even though simple geometric forms arise independently across cultures. A fish cross circle or ladder is not a linguistic connection by itself. To demonstrate relationship, researchers need systematic correspondences, historical contact, chronological compatibility, and consistent sound values. The Indus script has also attracted numerical and astronomical readings. Groups of strokes may indeed represent numbers, and some signs may relate to celestial observation. Bronze Age societies watched the sky, closely organized calendars, and timed agriculture or ritual through seasonal cycles. The problem comes when every sign is forced into a complete astronomical code. A few suggestive shapes cannot establish that seals were star charts, calendars, or planetary records. The object's archaeological context must support the interpretation, and most do not provide enough detail. Computers have introduced a newer form of confidence. Digital analysis can search thousands of inscriptions, detect repeated sequences, compare sign positions, and test whether proposed rules fit the corpus. These tools are invaluable. They reduce counting errors and reveal patterns that no individual could easily track. But a computer does not understand an ancient sign simply because it can classify it. Machine learning can group symbols, predict likely sequences, or compare statistical structure with known scripts. It cannot generate a reliable translation without grounded linguistic evidence. A model trained on known languages may decide which language produces sequences most similar to the Indus corpus, but similarity is not identity. Short texts create large margins of error. The corpus itself contains damaged signs, uncertain variants, and disputed objects. Feeding uncertain data into a powerful model may produce precise-looking results that are no more secure than the assumptions beneath them. An algorithm can make speculation appear mathematical without making it true. Some proposed decipherments reveal themselves through excessive flexibility. A sign receives one sound in one inscription and another sound elsewhere without a clear rule. Reading direction changes whenever needed. Symbols are treated as words, syllables, numbers, or silent markers according to convenience. Missing signs are imagined. Images are rotated. Grammar appears only after translation. Any method capable of producing every desired answer is incapable of being tested. A stronger proposal must risk failure. It should predict how an unpublished or newly discovered inscription will behave. It should explain repeated sequences before knowing their archaeological context. It should identify sign values that remain stable across sites and objects. It should clarify why certain signs never occur together and why others prefer fixed positions. Most importantly, independent researchers using the same method should reach broadly similar readings. No proposed decipherment has yet met those standards convincingly enough to establish consensus. This does not make previous work useless. Failed readings can expose sign patterns, improve catalogues, identify regional variation, and show which assumptions lead nowhere. Even mistaken hypotheses can sharpen the questions. The danger lies only in presenting possibility as solution. The unread script has therefore become a test of scholarly restraint. It rewards creativity but punishes certainty. It allows glimpses of order without surrendering meaning. Each generation approaches with better photographs, larger databases, refined linguistic models, and new archaeological discoveries. Each also brings its own expectations. The civilization remains protected not by an impossible cipher, but by the ease with which modern people mistake their own reflection for an ancient voice. The script does not disappear in a single dramatic moment. There is no final tablet announcing the end, no burned archive preserving the last orders of a collapsing state, no inscription naming the enemy at the gates. Instead, the world that sustained the signs begins to loosen. Streets are repaired less carefully. Long-distance standards become less consistent. Some neighborhoods are abandoned while others continue in altered form. Trade routes shift. Rivers change course. Populations move towards smaller settlements and different ecological zones. The civilization does not simply vanish. It breaks apart into local futures. For generations, Mohenjo-Daro was described through a powerful but misleading image, a city destroyed by violent invasion. Early excavators found groups of human skeletons in unusual positions and imagined a final massacre in the streets. Later popular accounts connected these remains to incoming Indo-Aryan warriors, creating a vivid story of conquest ending urban life. The evidence does not support such a simple conclusion. The skeletons came from different contexts and probably different periods. They do not represent a single battlefield. No widespread destruction layer marks the simultaneous fall of the major cities. The invasion narrative offered drama, but it explained too much with too little. The decline of the mature Harappan urban system unfolds over centuries, becoming clearer after roughly 1900 BCE. Some cities shrink, others are reorganized. Standardized weights and seals become less common. Long inscriptions do not appear, and the familiar animal seals begin to disappear. Certain craft traditions continue, but production becomes more regional. Pottery styles diversify. The broad cultural uniformity that once connected distant settlements weakens. What had looked like one integrated civilization increasingly becomes a mosaic of local communities. Climate is part of this transformation, though not a single cause. Studies of lake sediments, marine deposits, cave formations, and ancient river systems suggest that monsoon patterns weakened during the broader climatic changes affecting many parts of the Old World around the end of the 3rd and beginning of the 2nd millennium BCE. Rainfall became less reliable in some regions. Rivers fed by seasonal monsoons may have carried less water. Agricultural communities faced increasing uncertainty, especially where urban populations depended on regular harvests from surrounding plains. The Indus system was never dependent on one environment. Its settlements occupied floodplains, semi-arid zones, coastal regions, river margins, and areas near seasonal streams. This diversity offered resilience, but it also meant that environmental stress affected different places in different ways. A weakening monsoon might reduce flooding in one region, while making cultivation more difficult in another. River migration could destroy fields near one settlement and create new opportunities elsewhere. There was no single climate event that struck every city identically. Changing rivers may have been especially disruptive. The Indus and its tributaries move across broad alluvial plains, building new channels and abandoning old ones. Floods deposit fertile soil, but can also bury buildings, erode banks, and redirect water away from settlements. Mohenjo-Daro experienced repeated flooding or water-related sediment accumulation, and residents repeatedly rebuilt floors and walls at higher levels. Such repairs demonstrate resilience, but they also required labor. A city can survive many floods, yet each reconstruction strains institutions, materials, and confidence. Farther east, many settlements were located along the Gaga-Hakra river system and nearby channels. Some popular theories identify this system with the sacred Saraswati River, described in later texts, but the geological and textual questions remain disputed. What is clear is that ancient waterways in this region changed substantially over time. Some channels once received stronger flow from rivers that later shifted elsewhere. Others were seasonal rather than permanently glacier-fed. As water availability changed, settlements adjusted, relocated, or declined. No single explanation fully accounts for the transformation, because rivers do not act alone. Urban centers depend on networks. Farmers must produce surplus. Herding communities supply animals and goods. Craftspeople need raw materials. Merchants require safe routes and dependable demand. Administrators or institutions must coordinate labor, maintain standards, and resolve disputes. If several parts of this system weaken at once, cities may become less useful even without catastrophic destruction. Trade with Mesopotamia also changes during this period. Political disruption affects the Gulf and Western Asia, while commercial routes and centers of demand shift. References to Meluha become less prominent in Mesopotamian records. Indus-style goods continue to circulate, but the earlier intensity appears to decline. For coastal merchants and specialized workshops, reduced overseas exchange could have serious consequences. A bead-making center organized around elite foreign demand may not survive if ships arrive less frequently, or intermediaries move elsewhere. Internal trade may have weakened as well. The standardized weight seals and measurements of the mature Harappan world imply trust across distance. A merchant could recognize accepted units and familiar symbols in another city. Once political or institutional coordination declined, those standards may have lost authority. Local systems became sufficient for local exchange. The seal carrying an unread inscription was valuable only while others recognized the institution behind it. When that institution disappeared, the object became a relic rather than a tool. Population movement is one of the clearest consequences. People leave some large urban centers and establish or expand smaller settlements, particularly toward the east and south. This is not a flight into emptiness. It is a reorientation toward regions where rainfall, rivers, grazing, or agricultural opportunities may have been more dependable. Communities adapt by changing crops, settlement size, architecture, and patterns of exchange. Urban decline does not mean demographic disappearance. The descendants of Indus populations continue living across South Asia, carrying technologies, customs, genes, stories, and perhaps words into later societies. At several late sites, houses become smaller and construction less standardized. Baked brick is used less frequently in some regions, perhaps because large-scale kilns and coordinated labor are no longer available or necessary. Local pottery replaces widely shared urban styles. Burial practices change. Seals become rare. This may reflect the collapse of centralized or interregional institutions rather than a loss of technical knowledge. A village does not need monumental drains or thousands of standardized bricks. A local merchant does not need a seal recognized across a civilization that no longer functions as one system. Disease may also have played a role, though the evidence is limited. Dense cities with water channels, animals' waste, and long-distance movement can support the spread of infections. Skeletal studies from some sites show injuries, disease, and social stress, but the samples are small and uneven. Scholars still debate whether worsening health contributed significantly to urban decline or simply reflects difficult conditions within particular communities. The archaeological record preserves bones more readily than causes. Conflict appears in some late contexts, but not as one empire-destroying invasion. Fortifications, trauma on skeletons, and signs of local insecurity may indicate competition as resources and institutions changed. Violence could have grown where water, land, or trade became less predictable. Yet the transformation was too widespread and prolonged to be reduced to warfare alone. It was a convergence of pressures, environmental instability, river change, economic fragmentation, shifting settlement patterns, and weakened systems of coordination. The script declines within this unraveling because writing systems depend on communities of use. Seal carvers need patrons, officials need offices, merchants need networks that recognize their marks, learners need teachers. Standards survive only when institutions enforce them. As urban connections weaken, the practical reason to maintain a shared script may weaken with them. Local communities can continue farming, trading, worshipping, and remembering without preserving a notation system designed for a vanished scale of organization. What survives in the record suggests not a sudden civilizational death, but a slow reduction in shared complexity. The cities lose population and authority. The networks contract. The great pattern fragments into regional traditions. People remain, but the world in which a seal could travel hundreds of kilometers and still be understood begins to disappear. The script does not fall silent because everyone who knew it dies at once. It falls silent because fewer places still require it. Fewer institutions still teach it, and fewer strangers still trust the marks it carries. As the old cities contract, the script begins to vanish from the places where it once seemed ordinary. The change is not immediate. Some signs continue into the later centuries of the Indus tradition, appearing on pottery, small seals, tablets, and isolated objects. Certain symbols resemble earlier forms closely enough to suggest continuity. Yet the system becomes less frequent, less standardized, and more difficult to place within a shared cultural network. The once familiar combination of short inscription carved animal, carefully fired steatite, and standardized urban context fades from the archaeological record. What had connected distant cities becomes a scattering of marks whose relationship to the mature script is often uncertain. This disappearance is one of the most consequential events in the history of South Asia. Writing systems can survive the fall of states. Egyptian hieroglyphs outlasted dynasties. Cuneiform passed between languages and empires for thousands of years. Alphabets travelled across borders and adapted to new societies. The Indus script did none of these things in any clearly traceable form. It did not become the everyday script of the later subcontinent. It did not remain in temples as a sacred system. It did not survive in a priestly archive. No later inscription announces itself as a descendant. The visual tradition simply withdraws until the signs can no longer be followed with confidence. The reasons may lie in the narrow institutions that supported it. If the script was used mainly for seals, trade authorization, administrative identity, or elite exchange, then the collapse of those systems would remove its purpose. A merchant seal has value only where its authority is recognized. A sign for an office matters only while that office exists. A standardized inscription loses force when regions adopt local weights. local pottery and local networks, writing survives best when it serves many functions. A system limited to a restricted sphere can disappear quickly once that sphere contracts. This possibility may explain why no long-lived scribal tradition carried the signs forward. These script may have belonged to specialists rather than the wider population. Seal cutters could reproduce standard formulas without teaching full literacy to ordinary users. Merchants might recognize complete designs without understanding every component. Officials could memorize a controlled set of signs linked to titles or institutions. When the specialists lost patrons and the institutions dissolved, the knowledge may have narrowed within a few generations and then ended. Another possibility is that longer writing continued on materials that left no trace. Communities moving into smaller settlements may have used wood bark cloth or leaves rather than expensive stone seals. The script could have survived briefly in forms archaeology cannot recover. Yet if this occurred, no durable evidence shows a long continuation. Even pottery bone shell and metal objects from later periods fail to preserve a recognizable descendant system in sufficient numbers. The evidence remains incomplete, but the silence becomes harder to explain the farther one moves beyond the urban decline. Population continuity makes the loss especially striking. The inhabitants of the Indus world were not erased. Archaeology, genetics, and later cultural development all suggest that many communities remained in or moved through the region, contributing to later South Asian populations. Farming practices continued. Craft traditions survived in altered forms. Bead-making, shell-working, metallurgy and ceramic production did not suddenly vanish. Some settlement locations remained occupied. Certain religious or symbolic motifs may have endured, though direct connections are difficult to prove. People carried many elements of the past forward, but apparently not the script as a readable tradition. That separation between people and writing is not unusual. Languages can disappear while their speakers adopt new ones. Scripts can be abandoned when political authority changes trade systems, collapse, or new forms of communication become dominant. A community may remember stories, rituals, and techniques, while forgetting how ancestors recorded names on seals. Cultural survival does not require the preservation of every institution. The Indus case is remarkable only because the writing disappears so completely, while the civilization's descendants continue. Some scholars have searched later South Asian scripts for visual or structural connections. The Brahmi script appears securely in inscriptions during the first millennium BCE, more than 1,000 years after the decline of the mature Indus system. Brahmi becomes the ancestor of many later scripts across South and Southeast Asia. A few of its characters bear superficial resemblance to Indus signs, but simple shapes can recur independently. The chronological gap is enormous, and there is no continuous chain of intermediate inscriptions linking the two. Most specialists, therefore, do not accept a demonstrated descent from Indus to Brahmi. The Kharosthi script used in the northwest during the first millennium BCE is more clearly related to the Aramaic writing tradition, introduced through imperial and commercial connections. It too offers no secure bridge to the Indus signs. By the time readable scripts reappear in the region, the linguistic and political landscape has changed profoundly. New states' religions, trade networks, and administrative systems use different forms of writing. The old signs no longer seem to hold recognizable authority. Occasional objects have been claimed as evidence that the Indus script survived much later. Isolated symbols on pottery or metal sometimes resemble familiar signs. A few controversial inscriptions have been dated to periods after the urban collapse. But resemblance is not enough. A crossfish jar grid or trident-like form can occur in many symbolic systems. To demonstrate continuity, scholars would need repeated sign sequences, consistent direction, stable forms, and archaeological context showing gradual development. No such sequence has gained broad acceptance. The final users of the script therefore remain invisible. They may have lived in reduced neighborhoods of once great cities still carrying seals, whose authority extended only a few streets. They may have worked in small trading centers, where older symbols remained useful for one more generation. They may have copied signs learned from parents without understanding the full system their grandparents knew. The decline of literacy rarely happens at one precise moment. Knowledge narrows unevenly. One official retires without training a replacement. One workshop closes. One merchant family moves away. One local community adopts another method of marking goods. Gradually, a living system becomes inherited habit, then decoration, then incomprehensible form. There may have been no one who realized the script was dying. People facing unreliable rivers, shifting markets, and changing settlements had more immediate concerns. They adapted houses, crops, tools, routes, and alliances. A seal associated with distant urban institutions could become irrelevant in a village economy. Its stone might be kept as an ornament, reused, lost, or discarded. The disappearance of writing may have seemed less like catastrophe than practicality. A lesser-known detail is that some later artifacts appear to imitate earlier forms imperfectly. Where such objects are genuine, they may indicate that the visual prestige of seals outlasted knowledge of their exact use. Symbols can survive as respected shapes after their meanings fade. A later craftsperson might copy an animal or sign because it looks authoritative, much as ancient motifs are reused long after their original stories are forgotten. But imitation without literacy cannot preserve a script. The consequences are profound. Because no descendant tradition survives, later societies cannot explain the ruins they inherit. The names of the cities disappear. Their rulers, institutions, and deities leave no remembered list. When bricks are removed from Harappa thousands of years later, local people know the mound is ancient, but not which civilization built it. The script has failed to carry identity across time. What survives in the record is therefore a civilization without an internal historical bridge. Archaeologists can reconstruct its streets, diets, crafts, diseases, trade routes, and environmental pressures. They can measure its bricks and map its drains, but the words its people used for themselves are missing. The final signs disappear not only from objects but from memory. Once the last reader dies, the civilization becomes silent in a new and permanent way. The unread signs preserve a strange imbalance. The Indus civilization is one of the most extensively excavated urban cultures of the ancient world, yet it remains among the least able to explain itself. Its houses can be entered, its wells can be measured, the paths of its drains can be followed beneath streets. Archaeologists can identify the stone used for beads, estimate the temperatures reached inside kilns, trace shell objects back toward distant coasts, and reconstruct the movement of goods through river valleys and ports. But they cannot securely read a single personal name. The civilization survives in extraordinary material detail, while its inner vocabulary remains almost entirely inaccessible. A successful decipherment would change more than the labels attached to museum objects. It could reveal how the inhabitants identified themselves and the settlements in which they lived. Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, Dholavira, and Lothal are names given long after the cities ceased functioning. Their ancient names may still be present among the sign sequences, perhaps repeated on seals or displayed above gateways. A deciphered inscription could restore one of those names after 4,000 years, returning a fragment of identity to a place known only through ruins. The signs might also reveal how authority worked. Archaeology shows coordination but does not identify the institutions responsible for it. Standardized bricks regulated weights, water systems planned neighborhoods, and far-reaching trade all required organization. Yet the civilization leaves no obvious king's palaces, royal tombs, or triumphal monuments. If inscriptions contain titles, offices, institutional names, or references to governing bodies, they could clarify whether power rested with rulers, councils, merchants, ritual authorities, landowners, or several groups working together. Even a modest reading could transform this question. A repeated ending might turn out to mean administrator, merchant, priest, household, or district. A common sign group could name a city authority rather than an individual. Animal emblems might correspond to institutions controlling particular goods or territories. The apparent absence of kings might remain real, or decipherment might reveal that rulers have been present all along, concealed inside symbols no one can pronounce. Religion would also emerge from speculation into clearer form. Indus figurines, trees, animals, bathing structures, horned figures, and ritual scenes are often interpreted through later South Asian traditions. Some comparisons may reflect genuine continuity, while others may project familiar beliefs backward across an enormous span of time. Readable inscriptions could identify divine names, offering sacred places or ceremonial offices. They might confirm long-term connections, overturn them, or reveal a religious world that disappeared almost completely. The same applies to trade. A seal might name a merchant, workshop, cargo, or issuing institution. Numerical signs could specify amounts or measures. Inscriptions found abroad might identify people who travelled between Meluha, Dilmun, Magan, and Mesopotamia. The anonymous interpreter of Meluhan mentioned in a foreign record could become part of a wider network of named individuals. Instead of speaking only about exchange between civilizations, historians might follow particular merchants and families through the objects they left behind. Language would provide perhaps the greatest revelation. A decipherment could settle whether the script records an early Dravidian language, an Indo-Aryan form, a Munda-related language, a lost family, or something unexpected. It could expose loanwords, grammatical structures, and relationships invisible in archaeology. Even a short list of securely read words might preserve names for local animals, crops, rivers, tools, offices, and social groups. Those words could survive as echoes in later languages, allowing scholars to trace connections that currently remain hypothetical. Yet decipherment may not arrive as a sudden moment of triumph. There may be no dramatic discovery in which one brilliant scholar reads every seal overnight. Progress could come slowly, beginning with numbers, titles, repeated formulas, and object categories. Researchers might learn what certain signs do without knowing how they sound. They may identify a class of personal names while remaining unable to translate them. A mixed system of linguistic signs, emblems, and numerical notation could yield partial understanding rather than complete sentences. A new archaeological discovery could still alter everything. A bilingual inscription might lie beneath an unexcavated port settlement in the Persian Gulf. A ceiling could be found beside a cuneiform tablet naming the same merchant. A dry cave or a sealed container might preserve writing on wood cloth or another perishable surface. A long inscription could emerge from a gateway workshop or administrative building. Such finds are possible, but they cannot be assumed. Much of the civilization remains buried, yet much has also been permanently destroyed by rivers, erosion, construction, looting, and the decay of organic materials. Modern research continues to improve the chances of extracting meaning from what remains. Digital imaging can distinguish intentional strokes from damage. Three-dimensional scanning can reveal carving order and corrections. Better excavation records can connect inscriptions with rooms, tools, goods, and occupational layers. Statistical analysis can identify regional and chronological patterns. Linguists can test proposed values against reconstructed languages more rigorously. None of these methods provides a magical solution, but together they reduce the space in which unsupported claims can survive. The most important progress may come from refusing to separate script from civilization. The sign sequence is not an isolated cipher. It belongs to an object made from a particular material found in a particular place, associated with an animal image, workshop, house, burial, gateway, or shipment. Meaning may emerge only when those contexts are combined. A symbol that appears mysterious in a catalogue may become more understandable when its distribution is mapped against weights, craft zones, coastal trade, or urban districts. Scholars still debate whether the system encodes full language, a restricted notation, or a mixture of both. That uncertainty must remain visible. The desire to hear the Indus people speak should not encourage modern interpreters to place words in their mouths. A false decipherment would not restore the civilization. It would replace its silence with a modern invention. For now, the script guards more than information. It protects the Indus world from easy simplification. Without readable kings or chronicles, the civilization cannot be reduced to a sequence of rulers and wars. It must be approached through labor, watercraft, trade, settlement, disease, environment, and the quiet systems that held cities together. Its anonymity is frustrating, but it also forces attention toward people who rarely dominate ancient histories: brickmakers, farmers, well diggers, bead drillers, sailors, potters, herders, and the unknown carvers who cut signs backward into stone. One of those carvers may have sat in a workshop beside a courtyard, turning a small piece of steatite beneath steady fingers. The animal was shaped first, or perhaps the inscription. Each line had to be precise because the final impression would reverse every detail. The carver knew the signs, knew their order, and knew the authority they carried. There was nothing mysterious about them. The seal was completed, hardened, polished, and handed to someone whose name may still be written across its face. That person walked back into a living city. Water moved through wells and drains. Carts passed along brick streets. Smoke rose from kilns. Boats waited downstream. Goods were weighed, wrapped, marked, and sent toward places beyond the horizon. The civilization had a name for itself. Its people had names for one another. The signs preserved those names as faithfully as stone could preserve anything. Time did not erase them. It erased the knowledge required to hear them. The seal now rests beneath museum light, separated from the hand that carried it and the city that gave it meaning. Visitors lean toward the glass. They recognize the animal, count the signs, and search the tiny surface for some intuitive clue. The object offers none. It remains composed, exact, and silent. Beyond the museum, the old rivers continue to shift through their plains. Some channels still carry water toward the sea. Others survive only as pale traces across dry ground, visible from above or remembered beneath fields. The cities remain there too, partly excavated and partly buried their walls, rising only a little above landscapes that have absorbed them. Dust enters empty rooms. Salt gathers inside ancient bricks. Wells descend into darkness where no one draws water. Civilizations often imagine that memory is secured by building greatly or writing carefully. Yet survival is less predictable. Stone can be reused, archives can burn, languages can be abandoned. A text may endure perfectly while its meaning disappears. The Indus signs demonstrate that preservation and remembrance are not the same thing. The marks survived, but the world that explained them did not. Still, their silence is not empty. It has drawn generations back to the ruins. It has encouraged archaeologists to study details that a royal chronicle might have overshadowed the slope of a bathing floor, the weight of a stone cube, the wear around a seal's suspension hole, the impression of vanished cloth preserved in clay. Through these fragments, a civilization without a readable history has become visible again. Perhaps a key will one day be found. Perhaps a bilingual text waits beneath the remains of an ancient harbour, or a longer inscription lies undiscovered in a sealed room. Perhaps patient comparison will recover part of the system, without any spectacular discovery. Or perhaps the script will never surrender more than its patterns. The uncertainty does not diminish the people who made it. They built cities, managed water-crossed seas, measured value, and maintained connections across an immense landscape. They adapted when rivers changed and carried their lives into new regions when the urban world weakened. Their civilization did not vanish into nothing. It entered later populations, crafts, landscapes, and memories in forms too complex to trace through a single line. And so the final image is not of a locked door breaking open, but of a small seal lying in the dust after its owner is gone. Above the silent animal, several signs wait in perfect order. They once named something important. The wind passes over them, the city settles beneath the plain, and the message remains preserved, unread, and still guarding the dead civilization that gave it meaning.